representation of wilderness as wild and dangerous and to be conquered and tamed is in contrast to the imagery of paradise, which is exotic, safe, and seductive. The inhabitants are different, but not savage. The image is associated with the tropical island, where the environment is vivid in its colors and sounds, and limitless in its provisions of pleasures. In the concept of paradise, tourists from the industrialized countries of the north find a myth which they themselves have created, and thereby an environment which they have constructed. And there is a negative side to the concept of Caribbean islands as paradise, associated with the infinite bounty of nature. For, despite the limited size of our small islands, there is a sense of unlimited resources which contributes to an attitude of wanton waste. In Jamaica, the use of water and waterways, of trees and other plants, as though they were part of an endless cycle of replenishment, conditions much of the behavior towards and within the environment that one can observe in the country today. And what about the myth of the city? The city creates a magnetic construction of the urban environment and is based on the concept of opportunity and wealth. Yet the city, without employment to match the numbers seeking it, becomes degraded by the demoralizing effects of reduced food supplies, poverty, overcrowding, inadequate infrastructure, increased social pressures, and the growth of crime. The relationship with the environment then becomes sour, and perceptions about it negative. The myth of the city, therefore, becomes a counter-myth of paradise. And what is the importance of environmental myth? Not all myths protect the environment, as for example, the frontier or the city. But once society is conscious of the nature of the images contained in these myths, they can be useful tools in environmental understanding and management and in dealing with the dilemmas. For, above all, the myth demands an engagement with nature rather than solely material exploitation or even scientific explanation of it. It encourages the continuity between environment and people. Where there is unbridled exploitation of nature, there is no relationship, no dialogue. It is all take and no give. We need, therefore, to preserve environmental myths which reinforce the urge to find power in nature rather than over nature, and which convey the dimension of the transcendent in nature as well as the immanent or pragmatic, in order to provide checks on greedy human behavior. And we have to be careful of our images. As, for instance, we package our environment as a tourism product. Are images of happy natives singing and dancing in paradise those which we really want to construct of ourselves? Landscapes are not solely commodities of the economy, but contain meaning around which our environments are lost and found. In the modern world, there's a tendency to lose all contact with nature. I was speaking with some children recently, and I said to them, they're Kingston children, from where do we get milk? And one of them says, a box, the other one a tin, the other one said, a packet. I said, no. Milk comes from a cow. Whereupon they fell about laughing. I thought it was hilariously funny. And one of them said, no, what she say, not a joke, you know, because my grandfather tell me that when him was a boy, him used to get milk from a cow. What I'm worried about is that the last laugh may be on the cow, because the product now is so pasteurized, homogenized, evaporated, condensed, and dehydrated that the cow itself wouldn't be able to recognize it. But certainly what we have to be concerned about then is as much the poverty of our culture as the culture of poverty. And as we move then towards more and more development, so this becomes more important. We now turn to consider the greatest and most pervasive myth of our time, the myth of development, based on economic growth within the framework of modernization, and in which progress is regarded to be of itself a good. You only have to speak to people, and they really are disturbed about things that are happening. But they say, of course, I know progress is good. And really what I want to say is this thing is not good at all. But everybody is indoctrinated to feel that progress is of itself a good. This, together with increased poverty levels, the environment becomes progressively more degraded. Economic systems, infrastructure, and social fabric, especially community and family, all come under increased pressure. Both affluence and poverty have caused environmental deterioration, and both are closely linked to development. Paradoxically, the particular locality factors in Jamaica which enhanced the opportunities for industrialization and urban growth have become degraded by the processes associated with development itself. For example, the harbor of Kingston, renowned as one of the largest natural harbors in the world, was the raison d'etre for the development of Kingston. Yet it is so well protected that in fact the pollution does not disperse out of it. Likewise, the mangrove forests and wetlands of the coastal zone are themselves being destroyed by the very urban settlements of Kingston in particular that they should protect. A further paradox is the severe threats to health relating to environmental degradation associated with development. Agriculture needs land, yet farming methods are destroying good land. Tourism is destroying itself, and so forth. In the 1980s, there emerged a new approach, sustainable development. And the question is, was this going to bring the panacea, the miracle cure? In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development produced a report to the UN on the global crisis. Although this was not the first of its kind, nevertheless, the term sustainable development was at that point offered a straightforward and widely used definition. It is development which meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. However, the apparent simplicity of this definition is a long way from the complexities of the challenges that have to be met in order to bring about sustainable development in practice. The crux of the dilemma of environment and development is that there is no possibility of following the prescriptions of limits to growth while retaining the present economic system. This economic system generates the problems we face. Yet, if we ceased producing in our present economy, there would be chaos. Unemployment rates would soar, and firms would go bankrupt if people started to identify items that they did not need and cease to produce and consume them. Poverty levels would increase rather than decrease if production were to be reduced. And we have to maintain the tourist trade, the bauxite industry, and agricultural export crops for similar reasons. The economy is healthy only if production and consumption constantly rise and the volume of exports constantly expands. Yet, in the long term, sheer survival makes it necessary for us to change. The argument is that we must develop viable alternative technologies, economic structures, and lifestyles to which both industrialized and third world countries could move. People are only just beginning to realize that what seemed to be many separate problems, such as environmental degradation, resource depletion, high levels of crime, poverty, are not only linked, but are in fact largely caused by the same basic problem. This central problem is the expansion and entrenchment of what has been termed the growth and greed society. One cannot, therefore, propose fundamental change in the problems we face regarding the environment without the need for fundamental change in some of the basic values, lifestyles, systems, and goals that have driven Western societies for centuries. This is especially the case with regard to those material living standards associated with ideas of modernization and development. Let us consider now the ethical guidelines and belief systems from which society derives these values in the context of our relationship with the environment, and on the basis of which we create laws. First, the management ethic of the West is based on an approach to the environment which is essentially technocentric. That is, it is regarded as being entirely ethical for the environment to be managed by whatever technology can be made available. The market value factor itself is seen to provide the check on overexploitation of resources, because if you use too much, then of course the value goes down, and so that will provide the check. The second ethical viewpoint refers to the idea of intrinsic value based on the inherent worth of the natural environment and its various elements. This is an ecocentric view. Between the two extremes, there's a viewpoint which combines elements of both. This reflects a view whereby the intrinsic value of the non-human world is acknowledged, and people do have a sense of responsibility towards it, but primarily in terms of its ultimate value to humans. Despite our good intentions on behalf of the environment, the moral code from this perspective tends to favor those elements of the environment which are closest to humans, namely mammals. We have less regard for and even try to annihilate those animals which are lower down the scale and regarded as harmful to humans. For example, mosquitoes and other insects. Of course, different people draw the line at different points in the hierarchy, the specifics of which are largely cultural. For example, cows are revered in Hindu culture, dogs and pigs are regarded as unclean animals by Muslims, while a strict Buddhist would not harm an insect. Well, for me, as for many Jamaicans, I draw the line at croaking lizards. The dilemma from this middle ground chiefly becomes an issue of whether the end justifies the means. In this regard, perhaps the most critical dilemma of the present time in terms of the use of nature is the extent to which we should interfere with the genetic reservoir of the planet. Biotechnology, like the earlier domestication of plants and animals, is regarded as morally permissible. Livestock will get fatter faster, and crops will yield more. In fact, it will get to the point where chickens have larger and larger breasts and don't have any need for wings or legs, perhaps just enough neck and little feet to make cock soup. Secular perspectives suggest that as long as people are responsible in the way their technology is used, then humankind can consciously control the evolutionary processes of the environment, making management decisions on the basis of information technology. And let's face it, we're all getting hooked up onto the internet. But at what point does animal experimentation or genetic engineering in the service of humanity cross those thresholds from intrinsically good to unacceptably bad? Do the ends justify the means? Can technology be controlled once its capacity has been developed? For the power to control human genetics will also be within our scope, and the point at which we should stop will be a central issue of the environmental dilemma for future generations.